Please be seated. Thank you. Sorry, choir. I might turn it round at the end. Now, you might have heard the news, although why you should remember it, I've no idea, considering everything else that's going on. Bombardier. Bombardier, all right, tell me about Bombardier.
Well, ask Howard, he knows more than I do.
Howard.
Train.
Yes, trains. Planes. Bombardier have sold their operation in Northern Ireland to some group called US Spirit Aerospace. Well, when I worked there, it wasn't called Bombardier. It was called Shorts. Short Brothers and Harland Limited, and then Short Brothers, and then Short. And as the name got shorter, the profits got lower. Anyway, when I was working there on what was then Shorts Airfield, and now, should you have occasion to fly into Belfast, you will land on the George Best Belfast City Airport, and you'll swoop down low over what was my porter cabin office. Got me remembering, though, when I heard the news. I thought about Shorts and then Leofan, a short-lived and not very successful aerospace company that I went to work for afterwards, and needing a job, then a retail chain. So that was where I was working when we left Belfast at the end of '86. Our children, Victoria and Ed, they must have still been under 4. Elizabeth will nod or shake her head, but, you know, I'm a father, what would I know? But they hadn't started school, I know that much. 3 and 1, well, that's under 4, isn't it? Add their numbers together, it's still not over it. So Victoria had been baptized at St. Dorothea's Church in Gilnahirk, which indeed is where I had been baptized quite a few years earlier. So that's that's a bit presumptuous, but I'll put me in the middle. Lionel, note L, not M, you know. Have a certain discussion with people here as to whether my name's Nigel or Lionel. I assure you it's Lionel. And the person who baptized me, Lionel, was Jack Ralston, universally known as Joe, because his second initial was an O, but I never knew what his second name was. Oswald, Onesimus, who can say? Anyway, he did seem to me to be frightfully old, but I reckon he can only have been 40 tops when he left, and I was about 5, I suppose. And he died a few years ago at the age of 86. It's one of my saints, because he baptized me. He brought me into this family of saints. But there were others, and I'll put John Kyle at the top of my list. Always wise and kind, then as now. I think it was John who helped me to understand that faith in God isn't so much about believing in a fact. As a fact, God exists. But what that belief meant to my life. And I think also John believed in me, which can't always have been easy. And because he believed in me, I felt God could believe in me. And if God could believe in me, then that made it a bit easier for me to believe in God. So John is definitely one of my saints. And Jenny Smith. Well, it was Ken Smith, Jenny's husband, who married Elizabeth and I in St. Dorothea's Church, and it was Ken who prepared us for confirmation. But I'm going to say Jenny, because Jenny was the first person to say to me, you ought to think about ordination. Well, I ignored her wise advice for 10 years, but it sowed a seed, and I don't suppose I'd be standing here if it wasn't for Jenny. So we'll put Jenny up as well. And then Brian Shand. It took 10 years to even begin to think about it. I just didn't see myself as a priest. Priests were special, holy people. And then I met Brian. I've said this in his presence, so it's all right. And Brian was sort of reasonably ordinary and normal. And I thought, if Brian can be a priest, then maybe I could be too. So Brian's one of my saints. And one other, though I never actually met him, but unlike many people, I suppose, I first heard of him through his Narnia stories, which I enjoyed and I still read, but in reality, it's his theology. Books like The Great Divorce, Fern Seat and Elephants, Mere Christianity. And they have informed my theology, my sermons, my way of thinking. It was C.S. Lewis who allowed me to think that this Christianity is intellectually coherent. It's worth taking seriously. So I'll put C.S. Lewis on my list of saints as well. Now, so John Kyle, Jenny Smith, Brian Shand, and C.S. Lewis. And that tempts me to want to add to Jesus' Beatitudes, if I was allowed. Blessed are the encouragers, for they build the kingdom of God. But the interesting thing about these characters is that they had saints of their own. And I know that because I asked them, or at least those that I could. And John Kyle's included Dave Matthews. Remember, this is Northern Ireland. Dave Matthews, an independent, conservative, Methodist minister. Big man, bigger than me. Strong voice. And then in the 1970s, he was touched by the renewal movement and baptized in the Spirit. And he kept his strength, but instead of being threatening, it was now welcoming. A house church gathered around him. And in the 80s, he merged that with a similar Roman Catholic house group in the middle of the Troubles in Belfast. And John's second saint that he told me about was Ian Lodgepatch. Ian Lodgepatch, by this time John had moved to London. Ian Lodgepatch, a leading psychiatrist, used to hold morning breakfast Bible studies in his house in Kensington. And John got from Ian how to use Scripture and apply it to his life so it affected how he lived. So from Dave Matthews, he got Spirit, and from Ian Lodgepatch, he got the Word. Jenny Smith's saint was her Aunt Nancy. Her Aunt Nancy, a spinster, who ran her parents' tea shop during the week. And on Sundays, she went with them to church, because that's what you do. And on Saturdays, because her father was a big rugby fan, and commiserations to any here who are big rugby fans, she went with him to rugby, and on this occasion to an international, where she met an English farmer who'd come over for the international. And they fell in love. And he asked her to marry him, and she said yes. And her parents disowned her because he'd been divorced a few years before. and they wouldn't come to her marriage. And when she moved to England to live with him, she was refused communion in the parish church and not permitted to be a member of the Mothers' Union. And Aunt Nancy never closed the door on her parents, never stopped coming to church, and eventually her parents were reconciled to her, and the church discovered that forgiveness and understanding is better than condemnation and judgment. And whenever Jenny is inclined to be judgmental, she remembers her Aunt Nancy and tries to understand and to forgive and to accept. Brian Shand. Well, Brian grew up in a totally non-Christian family. He was a French scholar, is, when he's not being a priest, or a psychotherapist, which he also is. Quite irrelevant to what I'm saying. But he was studying in the University of Paris for his French, and he was starting to read the Bible simply to improve his French vocabulary. And it was through reading the Bible that he began to have something of a conversion experience, but he didn't really understand what it was all about and what it meant. And it was this chap, Chrétien Houteau, a fellow student in Paris, who helped him to understand what he was reading and helped him to take the step to being a Christian. So for Brian, I shall put Chrétien Houteau, and also when he returned to London, his university chaplain there, Bill Sykes. And Bill Sykes, who encouraged him to be confirmed, but said to him of that and of all the steps that he was to take in his Christian life, you've always got a choice. Right now, right here, what you decide to do, how you decide to live, you always have a choice. So that's another one of Brian's. Well, for C.S. Lewis, I'm going to have to guess. But I think I would say Arthur Greaves, who was a childhood friend, a lifelong friend of C.S. Lewis. Lewis said he wasn't particularly influential in his conversion to Christianity, but he was there as a Christian presence throughout his life, through Lewis's breach with his father, through his service in the First World War, through the increasing fame that he gathered as his writings and broadcastings became more popular, through the short and tragic marriage with Joy, and then his bereavement and his own final illness. All through that, this very ordinary Belfast boy, Arthur Greaves, always in touch through writing and visits, just a Christian presence, nothing special, but someone to keep him rooted and grounded, an example of Christian life. And I'm only guessing, but I would guess Tolkien as well. They weren't the best of friends. Tolkien, devout Roman Catholic. C.S. Lewis was to write that a young man who wishes to remain sound in his atheism needs to be very careful about his reading. And Lewis found himself reading Tolkien's books, and although they didn't convince him of the reality of God, he began to wish that God was real. And after a while, his head caught up with his heart. And in his reading and his conversations with Tolkien, he began to be able to realize that this deepest desire that he had inside himself, this yearning which he calls joy and surprised by joy, this yearning, this always finding that nothing in this world can satisfy the desires of our hearts, that came to fruition and was formed into faith through his work with Tolkien. So, those are some of my saints and their saints. And now all of you are amongst my saints. Now, I know you were befuddled as to why you were given little square pieces of paper and asked if you had a pencil or pen with you. So, if you do not have a pretty sticky piece of paper, please put up your hands and someone will get you one. There's a hand here. Thank you. Yeah, so if you could distribute any to any who don't have access to a pen, thank you. Now what I want you to do is I actually want you just to take a moment, and I hope that you are thinking about some people who've been your saints. So just take a moment to think about that, and then just say to the person beside you, just listen to what they have to say and say to them that Jim Bloggs was my saint because, just a sentence or two. And then I want you to write Jim Bloggs or whoever your saint is on your piece of paper, and when you come up for communion, stick the piece of paper onto the handrail and we'll surround the altar with our saints. And if these are our saints, and we are saints to each other, then let us also be saints to all those around us. Let us be people who can inspire and encourage and reveal what this journey of faith, what the goodness and glory of God is to us and for the world. So please take a moment to think and then just to say and write it. I feel a little like an invigilator at an exam, but the murmuring seems to have died down and most of the pens aren't moving. So if you haven't written it down yet, then I'm sure you'll take a moment to do that before you come up.